Is it? Oh, it just recording the screen.
Yeah, we press the screen and everything you guys say will be recorded.
How can it read what we're saying?
Yeah, it's a pretty good laptop they give me, I guess. Anyway, so welcome back. Okay, I'm glad to see you guys all returning for our second class. So today is quite busy. We have a few big concepts we have to go through. We'll be taking quite a bit of notes, so make sure you have your paper and pens with you. And we are basically going to be going through the scientific method. Okay. And the scientific method is a series of steps that are involved when we try to address some of the questions that we might have based on our observations. Okay? Last class, we talked about how after making a series of observations, we then come up with a generalization. But we don't know if the generalization is correct or not. And so that's what the scientific method is going to be. It allows us to test our generalization and to see whether it is accurate or not. So there are a few steps involved in the scientific method, starting with observations, asking questions, making hypotheses, so on and so forth. So this is just like an overview slide. We're going to go into much more detail for each of these steps as we progress through today's class. Let's start with something that you probably can relate to. Let's say you go home after a long day of school or work, and you want to watch some TV. You pick up the remote, you press it, nothing happens. So that's our observation. The remote doesn't work. The logical question to ask next is, what's wrong? What is the problem here? Based on previous experience in your life, right, you probably can guess maybe the battery is not working. So that's a tentative answer to your question. Right? We call that a hypothesis. The hypothesis, some people call it an educated guess. Okay? It might not be correct, it might be correct, we don't know. Right? But it's our best answer for the moment. Then you make predictions. If I'm right, then this should happen. If I am wrong, then you would expect that to happen. And then you're gonna go ahead with doing the experiment, replacing the battery. One of two things is gonna happen. You either fix the remote and then you solve the problem. Or if you after replacing the battery and it still does not work, and that means your hypothesis was incorrect. And you have to go back and revise it. So what else could be wrong besides the battery?
The buttons are broken.
Sure, button is broken. What's that?
No, just predict what's happening with the TV panel, right?
Yeah, it could be the TV itself, right? Maybe the TV is not plugged in, right? So there are other possibilities, right? Other explanation for what's happening. And then you would, basically repeat this process until you can solve the problem. Okay, so that's a very simplified version of what the scientific method would look like on a very common everyday problem. So I'm going to go through a few examples with you throughout today's class, and hopefully by the end you will understand how to apply it to different situations. Suppose you have some plants in your home, and you notice some of them grow taller than others. So that's an observation. You notice some plants seems to be doing much better than other plants. A logical question to ask would be, why are some plants taller than others? If they're both growing in the same home, how come one grows taller than the other? So after asking a question, what's the next step? You remember? Hypothesis. That's right. We have to try to answer our own question, right? With our best knowledge, okay? And that's our next step, hypothesis. So let's write down what a hypothesis is. Okay, a hypothesis is basically a tentative answer. Tentative answer. Some people, bless you. Some people say an educated guess. It's important to understand the hypothesis is a statement, it's not a question. You don't answer your question with more questions. So when you write the hypothesis for your lab, you have to keep that in mind. For a hypothesis to be valid, for it to be acceptable, it needs to follow two criteria. Number one, it must be testable. It means you should be able to run an experiment to check it. If you can't do an experiment to test it, then it's not a good hypothesis. Number two, it must be falsifiable. And falsifiable means it is potentially wrong. Potentially wrong. After all, if your hypothesis is always correct, then that means you already know the answer to your question, right? Then there's no need to do an experiment. You understand? So things like opinions, cultural, religious beliefs, superstitions, these things, there are no right or wrong answer. You can't test them. And therefore, we should not be including these things into our hypothesis. So let me give you a few bad hypotheses. Example. Number one, animal testing is bad. Rock music are better than classical music. These are not good hypotheses because they are opinions, and we cannot test opinion on that. And it's because this is your personal preference. Even though we've split them into groups and then we see who agrees and who disagrees, that doesn't show anything, right?
Wait, so for the animal testing one, so why on like brand, if it's considered an opinion, why on like some brands or products, they'll say like, oh, no animal testing?
Which is fine, right? They're not claiming it, they're just claiming this is what they did, right?
Yeah.
It's not a hypothesis in the sense that it's not something that we can run an experiment to,
Oh.
figure it out.
Oh, okay.
So that is the situation for the first two. These are not testable. Okay, the next two, the garden fairies make some plants taller than others. Okay, why is this a bad hypothesis? Huh? Superstitious? Yeah. Do garden fairies exist? But how do you know? Yeah, exactly, right? You can spend your whole life in your garden and not see a single garden fairies, but that doesn't mean this is wrong. You just haven't seen it. You bad luck, right? And if you wait long enough, maybe you will see one. You understand my argument? That's why this is not falsifiable. Right? It cannot be wrong. Okay? Even though all of us sit in our own gardens for the whole life, and none of us see a garden fairies, still that wouldn't necessarily mean that this is false. Okay, so for that reason, it is not falsifiable, and therefore is not a good hypothesis. Okay, similarly, the next one is also not falsifiable. We good? All right, let's look at some good ones. All right, some good hypotheses. This is related to the scenario I was trying to explain to you. Plants receiving more sunlight grows taller. I don't think we can test. We can put some plants in light, some without so much light, and then compare the result. And we could be wrong. Maybe it's not the sunlight, maybe it's something else. Okay. Driving with the windows down will increase fuel consumption. Who agrees with this? In the summer, if you drive with the windows down, do you think it's going to cause more gas? Only a few people. Okay. Some people disagree. They were like, it's actually worse if you keep the windows up and use your AC. So that's something we can test. Okay, and it could be one way or the other. It could potentially be wrong. Melatonin. Anybody know what melatonin is? Yeah. What do people take it for?
For better sleep and relaxation.
That's right. So taking melatonin is actually a hormone your brain makes that you can buy them at Walmart or something. Taking melatonin will increase sleep duration. So Again, it's something we can test. We can put people in different groups. And some take it, some don't take it, and then we figure out whether or not it make them sleep better. Yeah, so these are valid hypotheses. And the key thing to know is you don't have to know the right answer to make a hypothesis. It's just a tentative answer. You won't know until after you've done an experiment and test it out. Okay? So how do we run an experiment? So an experiment, the purpose of an experiment is to test the hypothesis. And in an experiment, there are many things that can change. Anything that can change is called a variable. We try to keep all the variables the same. We try to standardize them, except for the dependent and the independent variable. So this is where people get very confused. Even after, I try to explain this for half an hour, a lot of people still get confused between dependent variable, independent variable, and standardized variable. And it's something that's important because you will use them in your lab, right? So let's try to take a note on this and ask me questions if you are confused. So let's start with independent. Independent variable. So independent variable is the variable that is being changed by the person doing the experiment. You can think of it like this. You are in control of the independent variable. Right? Independent variable is what you are in control of. That's how you can remember it one way. Let's say we try to do an experiment to test the hypothesis of more sunlight will make a plant grow taller. Which one are you in control of? The amount of sunlight or how tall the plant is going to be? Right, the sunlight is what you can regulate, right? The sunlight is what you can physically put the plant in the light or not. So that is the independent variable. You are in control of the independent variable. Right, so that would be the amount of sunlight. Okay, remember, these notes will be posted online after, so you don't have to take pictures. Yeah.
Is it too generalized to say the independent variable is the cause and the dependent is the effect?
That's good. Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Yeah, keep that in mind. Very good. Okay, so let's take a look at the other one, the dependent. Dependent variable. In an experiment, the dependent variable is the variable that is being measured or observed. So example, in our plant experiment, that would be the height of the plant. Height of the plant. How tall is it? In any experiment, the purpose is to find out, is to determine if changes in the independent variable has any effect, okay, on the dependent variable. Again, in this case, the question you will try to address is, does changing the amount of sunlight a plant receives affect how tall it grows? Does changing the independent variable, whatever it is in each experiment, is that going to have any effect on the dependent variable? If it does, then we might have a cause and effect relationship. But sometimes there might be no effect, and that's okay as well. Does anybody have any question? Yeah. All right. Let's take a look at these examples again. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk with people around you. And I want you to identify the independent and dependent variable for these two hypotheses. If you're going to run an experiment to test this, or to test this, what would be the dependent and independent variable in each case? Just like talk with people around you. Okay, meet someone because you guys gonna be doing labs together. If you don't know anyone for the labs, I'm gonna put you in groups, which is worse.
It picks up the sunlight and it's like what you can control, like input and multiple, so the sunlight affects how you can follow the light. So it's present. Like sunlight is the independent. Yeah. No. Yeah, but the how tall it grows is the.
When you say about.
You have to take it all on yourself. Well, so.
Yeah, and.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's come back together. Driving with the windows down will increase fuel consumption. Anybody want to share what the independent variable is? Sure, go ahead.
Independent is going to be the, wait, did we just?
No, for the window.
Oh, for the windows.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so the independent is gonna be the windows down and then fuel is dependent.
Okay, yeah, so that's good. I would say the position of the window, right? That's probably a little, yeah, position of the window. Very good. And then you can put in bracket open or close. And then dependent variable would be fuel consumption. Does everybody agree? Run for your lives, people. We're safe, don't worry. Taking melatonin will increase sleep duration. What would be the independent variable for something like that? Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so taking melatonin or not, right? And what about the dependent variable? What would it be? Yeah, the sleep duration. Exactly. Are we okay? Yeah, hopefully they'll turn that off soon. I'm sorry, it's really distracting. So in the study guide, question number 6, there are more practice for you. Okay, so why don't you guys give that a try? Let's see if I can find out if security coming on. There's a emergency door that says do not open, alarm will sound. I'm pretty sure someone went through it, that's why. They'll come up. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah. Okay, so make sure you try these out at home, okay? The answers are posted online. Let me just show you quickly where they are, in case you missed it. Okay, so you log on to Illuminate. You choose our course. Oh no, you guys are 202 actually. 202. If you missed last class, there are recordings here. Just click on that and view it. There are the class notes for last class. And under lecture 1, study resources. See that's the answer, right? Okay. So make sure you do it. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, cough, cough. All right, you get it? Okay. Moving on. So let's actually set up the experiment. Just recap. Our hypothesis was that some plants are taller because they receive more light. And it's testable. It could potentially be wrong. That's why it's a good hypothesis. We're gonna go ahead and do the experiment. So let's write it out together. All right, so let's do an experiment. All right, we're gonna have a plan here. Okay, draw your best plan. So we have 2 groups in our experiment. We have what's called the control group. Control group. Okay. The control group of an experiment is the group that receives no modifications. We're not changing it. Okay, this is just as is. And the purpose of having a control group is to provide, the control group provides a baseline or a reference for comparison. Think about this for a second. If I just have a single plant and then I put it in sunlight and then it grew by 15 centimeters after 2 days, how do I know that's a lot of growth or not? Like what's 15 centimeter? Is that more than normal? Is that less than normal? What is normal? I wouldn't be able to answer that unless I have a reference to compare with, right? That's what the control is. The control is to provide a baseline for you to compare your results with. Without the control, your numbers, your measurements, your observations is difficult, if not impossible, to interpret. Right? So the other group we have over here, this is called the treated group. Treated group or the experimental group. Okay, this is the group that receives a modification. Just one. Okay. You cannot change more than one thing at a time. Okay. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what's causing what. So in this case, the only thing we are changing between the control group and the treated group is the amount of sunlight, right? Don't change the water, don't change the soil. Everything else must be the same between the two groups, except for the independent variable. Okay. So the only difference should be the independent variable. Are you guys okay? Any questions? Awfully quiet. So let's have a list of things on the side where we need to keep the same for both groups. I already mentioned a few, right? We should have the amount of water, for example. What else should be the same between them?
Quality of the air,
The
air quality.
air quality. Okay, let's call that environment. Anything else? Just yell them out if you have it. Soil type, yeah. It means the same thing. Yeah. Anything else? That's it. Temperature, yeah. So that's part of the environment, but let's write it out. Okay, maybe a few more. Same time? Oh, same kind. Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah, same type of plant. You don't want to do lettuce versus celery sticks, okay, because they grow differently. Same type of plant. One more, maybe.
Exposition to the light.
The position exposure to the light. That actually would be our independent variable, though, right? That's the one thing we don't want them to be the same. One more. Yeah.
Maybe like the pot that it's in.
Sure, yeah. Pot size. Actually, some plants, they only grow as big as the pot. And once you repot them to a bigger pot, they might start growing more as well, right? So if you have them in different pots, and you don't really know if that's an effect, right? So here's the thing. These things that we are keeping the same between the control group and the treated group, we call these standardized variables. Okay, these are things that could change, but we make sure that they don't. Okay. So that if we see one of these plants being taller than the other, we can say with confidence it was caused by the sunlight, the amount of sunlight, and not any of these things. Okay, which is why, once again, between the control group and the treated group, there can, at most, be one thing that's different. If you have more than one thing that are different, then you don't know. Like, was it the sunlight? Was it the water? Right? Okay, so I'm gonna write down for you. The purpose of standardizing variable is so that if we observed any differences in the dependent variable, the height, okay, we know it is because of changes in the independent variable. And not anything else. I will learn the names by next week, okay, I promise, but for now, it's easier for you to check your self in. Pass it around. All right, moving on. And if you miss some of these things, it's okay. I'm gonna post it online after. So here we have two groups here. We have 6 hours of light and 12 hours of light. That would be our control, regular amount of light, and then more light. And like I said, you want to standardize everything. This is pretty much what we've listed. All right. So we're gonna make a prediction. Remember, after hypothesis, we're gonna make a prediction. If the hypothesis is correct, then plants exposed to more light will be taller. Otherwise, you would expect them to have the same height, or maybe a little bit surprising, but more light will actually make it shorter. That certainly is possible. Some plants don't like light that much. If these are hypothetical results, let's say you do this experiment for 7 days. The plant that received 6 hours of light every day grew by 1 centimeter, and then the one that got twice as much sunlight grew by 18 centimeter. Grew by 6 centimeter rather. So based on this result, do you think our hypothesis is correct? It looks like it, right? It looks like more light is gonna make the plant taller. All right. So conclusion, the experimental data supports the hypothesis, more light will make the plant grow taller. Now I gotta tell you guys that this is an oversimplification, okay? No one's gonna do an experiment with just one sample comparing with another sample, right? That's actually pretty bad science, okay? In real life, you're gonna have really big sample size. Can you imagine testing the effectiveness of a vaccine, right? With just 2 people? Okay, you're not gonna get it, you're gonna get it. Okay, you feel better? Excellent, it works. Let's give it to 8 billion people, right? And that would be terrible side effect. So like this, again, this is like oversimplification. We need to have bigger sample size to gather accurate data. And in real life, usually the conclusion from one experiment is going to lead you to more questions. Now that we know that the sunlight is going to affect their height, maybe we should find out the optimal light exposure. Right? So let's not just do 6 and 12. Let's include 8 hours, 10 hours, all the way up to 24 hours of light and see what is the optimal light that will create the tallest plant. Okay, so there's always going to be like follow-up questions, if you would, in an actual experiment. Okay, if we know the vaccine works, let's find the optimal dose. Right? Let's find out if we're going to have a booster right? So on and so forth.
Sorry, doesn't it also depend on the type of plants?
Right, of course, right? So like in this case, to make sure that we are that's being addressed, we are using the same type of plant, right? Okay, so like, maybe this is true for, I don't know, lettuce, then you might want to test it out for, beans or something. Right? Again, more questions. It's not the end when you finish the experiment. Okay, let's see if you've learned anything from me. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, when we do these questions, you don't yell out the answer, you just show me the finger. Okay, if you think it's A, put up 1. If you think it's B, you put up 2. And afterwards, you look at me and I'll tell you whether you got it right or not. Good. Anyone else? Good. Try again. Good. Anyone else? Yeah, that's good. Okay. Tentative answer. I literally wrote it down for you, okay? That was the hypothesis. Make sure you write down the answer. Some of these questions will show up on your quiz. How about this one? What's the answer? Yeah, good. I can't see on the, yeah, yeah, good. Yes. Yeah, I try again. Good. Anyone else? Let's try. So to test the hypothesis, we have to perform an experiment. All right. If you're wondering who came up with this stuff, who came up with the idea of hypothesis and experiment, and why are we following it all along, right? Well, let me give you a bit of a history lesson. It all had to go back to the mid and late 19th century. Back then, people are always wondering. I guess people still wonder that nowadays, but like before, people debate about the origin of life, where the life come from. And one theory that's kind of floating around at the time is the theory of spontaneous generation. Spontaneous generation is the idea that living things arise from non-living things. Okay? And people saw some evidence of that. Okay? They say, if you leave a piece of meat outside in some hot summer day, and then you come back a couple of days later, you would see flies and maggots kind of, growing around or on the meat, right? So they're like, hey, that's evidence that supports spontaneous generation. Right? The meat is not alive, but then you have all these living things that are seemingly spawning from it. Okay. There are also phenomena that they observe that further support their belief of spontaneous generation. Okay. Every now and then, people would see that fish and frogs and other life forms rain from the sky. Like sea, right? The fish, that's where they came from. They came from the sky, which is not living, right? And that further supported their view on spontaneous generation. Now, this is true. Some of you look like, what's he talking about? I've never heard of this before. It's true. If you do a Google search, you will see it still happens nowadays. For example, Texas witnessed a rare weather phenomena as fish rain from the sky. Happened in Mexico, Malta, and Australia. Right? Has anybody heard of this before? No, someone told me in my other class they saw it on TikTok or Instagram. I don't know one of them. Okay, so this is true. Okay, I'm not making this up. This is not fake news. Right?
But how?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you how. Okay. So, the reason for this phenomena is basically like a water spout. It's like a tornado sort of. They go through the water, okay, and then they scoop up all these things from the water, fish and whatnot, and then the tornado basically sends them inland, right? And it appears to be raining from the sky. Right? My other student also told me, oh, it's like that movie with the sharks raining from the sky. I think it's called like Sharknado or something, right? But you know, a shark is really big. I don't think they're gonna get swooped up, right? But for small fishes, it's all right. It happens, right? So we understand weather pattern now, okay? But back then, right, in the 19th century, not so much, right? People just take that as evidence to support the idea of spontaneous generation. You with me?
Yes.
Okay. So like we laugh at that now because obviously it's not true, but then a lot of people believed in it. Okay. And it's not until this guy in the 1600s, his name was Francesco Redi, he wanted to put the theory of spontaneous generation to the test. He wanted to kind of disprove it by using a series of steps involving making observations, asking questions, and forming hypotheses. And that basically laid the foundation of what eventually became the scientific method. Yeah. Oh, thank you. All right, so pay attention to Radi's experiment. We're gonna go through it together, and there will be some questions on the quiz for this as well. So observations, all right? Flies and maggots can be seen around pieces of meat left out on the counter. Right, if you're not familiar with this process, I encourage you to try it out this summer. Okay, you will never forget it. And then the question would be, where do flies come from? Is the rotting meat transformed into the fly? Okay, so observations, questions, and then what comes next?
Hypothesis.
Hypothesis. So the hypothesis was only flies can make flies. Rotting meat cannot be transformed into flies. Okay. Let's take a look at his experiment. More notes. So this is Radi's experiment. On spontaneous generation. In case you missed it, spontaneous generation is the theory that suggests living things arise from non-living things. He's going to do an experiment to see whether or not it is correct. Okay, so this is how his experiment went. Some version of it. Okay, there's a jar. And he put a piece of meat in the jar. So he had 3 jars set up. Jar 1, jar 2, jar 3. Right now, guys. Take a look at me. Lots of things coming your way. Don't wait until the end. Okay, so this is the control. Control is necessary to provide a baseline to compare the results with. So his control, it's an open jar. Open jar. Okay, it's exposed to the air. This is treatment number 1. Treatment number 1. How many things can we change between control and treatment? 1, that's right. And he put a net on it. Okay, a net. Okay, so this one is a jar with net covering. And treatment number 2. Treatment number 2. This one it's gonna be sealed. And I'm sure they don't have saran wrap back then. I'm not sure what he sealed it with. Maybe a piece of cloth, but it's sealed. Sealed jar. All right. As you are drawing this, I want you to think about the dependent and the independent variable in this experiment. And also standardized variables. The independent variable. What's the only thing that was changed? Yeah.
Like a cover.
The type of covering, right? The type of coverings. Is it no cover? Is it netted cover? Is it like fully covered? All right, so that's something that he was in control of. That would be the type of covering. And what was he trying to observe or measure in this case? What is he trying to figure out?
The level of rottenness.
The level of rottenness, okay, yeah. Close. Okay.
If flies come from rotten.
Yeah, okay. Getting closer. How do we phrase it so that it matches hypothesis?
Wait, living things arise from non-living things?
Oh, yeah, that's the purpose of the experiment. Yeah. That's exactly what he's gonna say. Okay, yes, at the back, please.
Type of cover changes. If the type of cover changes the effect.
You guys are trying to create a question, I think.
Wait.
But I'm just looking for one thing. What is he, for example, back in the plant experiment, we're trying to see the height of the plant, right?
Yeah.
What are we looking for here? One thing. What was he trying to observe?
Can meat transform into fly?
That's right. So the thing that he's looking for would be the presence of, yes, presence of flies. And probably maggots, okay? Are we together? I know I asked that a lot, but like for real. Okay. Okay. For this to work, he has to keep everything else the same, right? So what are some things we need to ensure are consistent between the three groups? Yeah.
Temperature.
Temperature, sure. They don't have fridge back then yet, right? 1600? Probably not. Okay, so like leave them all outside. Right? Okay, what else?
Meat.
Type of meat, yes. Type of meat and the quality of the meat, right? They should be same age. You can't get a fresh piece and then the old one, right? Two more? Huh?
Amount of flies or bugs?
That's not something that we can keep the same, right? Like we're just gonna leave them outside and let it be, right? It's not like I can, Sure, the cleanliness of the jar, I guess. If does that make sense? Cleanliness of the jar. You want them to be clean to begin with, and maybe just one more, please. Yeah.
Humidity.
Humidity, sure. Humidity. Okay. Yeah. Duration. Okay. The time. How long you gonna leave them outside for? It should be the same. Duration. Okay, let's use our common sense. Like, oh, Brady, you didn't have to do experiment. I could tell you what the result would have been using common sense. Right. So here, flies or no flies? Yeah, definitely flies. Okay, definitely flies. Okay, buzzing around. Maggots, gonna be gross. Hey, how about here? Flies? Oh no. Yeah, just on the net, right? There's some maggots crawling around on the net, buzzing around. Okay. Meat is gonna be gross, but it's gonna be inside the jar. Okay. Flies or no flies for the last one? No flies. Okay, no flies, no maggots. Okay. Again, the meat might be gross inside, the juice and everything, but there will be no flies. Okay. So that was the result. And that, of course, rejected the idea of spontaneous generation. Because if flies did came from the meat, you would see flies here as well, right? Okay. But of course, he did not. So that's the scientific method. Do you think people believed him? Some do. Most, some don't. Okay, just like nowadays, right? Same thing for science, right? So Rayleigh experiment did not convince everybody. Right? Some argue while spontaneous generation is not true for big things like flies and maggots, it could still be true for microorganisms. Okay, for like microscopic stuff that you cannot see with your naked eye. And that question was finally definitively answered by this guy. And his name was Louis Pasteur. You might not have heard of him before, but if you drink milk or honey, you benefit from a process created by him. What process am I talking about? Pasteurization. That's right. You cannot drink milk directly from the cow. I hope you know that. It's gonna make you sick. Okay, some people do it though, I think. And same thing with the honey. You cannot consume raw honey. It's not good for you. You probably gonna get botulism from it in some cases. So pasteurization basically sterilize it. And so let's take a look at Louis Pasteur's experiment. So here we go. Pasteur's experiment. Okay. Lots of drawing in this class. You'll be an excellent artist by the end. So there is a flask. This is the flask he used. Okay, and he had two of these things called volumetric flask. And for one of them, he hooked it up to a special top. Okay, this is called a swan neck because it's look like the neck of a swan neck top. And then over here, this is an open top. And then he filled these things up with some broth, like chicken broth, beef broth, whatever the case is. Some broth. So these are heat treated broth. It would be initially sterile. Okay, there will be nothing living in it. Boil them, kill everything. It's gonna be sterile. Nothing alive. So that's part of standardization, right? I'll make sure that the broth are both the same at the beginning. And then he left these things out in the open for a couple of days, let's say. All right, so he came back and he looked at it at day 7, for example. And then he examined the broth. Do you think he will find things growing in it for this one over here? Yeah? Thumbs up if you think something's going to be growing. Thumbs down if you think nothing's going to be growing. Okay, excellent. Everybody knows the answer. Okay, so day 7, there are microbes. And for over here, anything growing? Thumbs up or thumbs down? What do you guys think? Okay. Very good. Nothing's gonna be growing. Okay. Day 7. It's gonna be still good to drink, maybe. So what does that tell you? Tells you spontaneous generation is definitely not true. Because if it's true, then you will also see microbes growing here, right? Okay. So he concluded that the organism actually landed into the broth from the air. Right? It's not possible if you have a swan there. Right? They will land, but then they are like all gathered here. It's not going to be able to make it all the way to the broth, right? Okay, so based on that result, spontaneous generation was definitively rejected. Okay. All right. I think we can take a break now. But before you go, I want to show you this. So let's take a look at one of these questions. It's also in the study guide. You don't have to look for it. You can just read it off the screen. A farmer wants to determine if feeding cows with a high protein diet would increase milk yield. Okay. A farmer wants to determine if feeding cows with high protein diet would increase milk yield. All right. So I want you to try this out. Okay, there's a QR code. You can scan it and you can give me 3 standardized variable for that experiment. Okay. If you are going to test and see whether increasing protein diet, proteins in the cow diet will make more milk, what I'm gonna hide these things. Remember, we are trying to, I was doing an activity, yeah. Here's the question, all right? We are trying to test if increasing protein in cows' diet would cause them to make more milk. So please go log on and give me 3 standardized variables.
It can only be one word.
Now you can type, yeah.
Oh, okay. It's okay.
So if you feed cows with more protein, do you expect to have more milk production? If you're doing that experiment, what would be 3 standardized data? That's it. The answers so far. Keep them counting. So we are trying to see if feeding cows with more proteins will cause them to make more milk. So when I do the experiment, what are 3 standardized variables? Okay, just maybe a minute or so. Keep them coming. Last call before I review. All right, let's see. Okay, you can keep typing if you want. So, type of cow, sure, you want to use the same breed, and temperature, yeah, environment, like where you keep them, right? Okay. Age is good. I want it to be similar age group, not like older ones and younger ones. Same diet, other than the protein though, right? Remember, we're trying to test different protein diets. So you don't want it to be exactly the same diet. Where did it go? You don't want it to be same diet, okay? The protein needs to be different. How much milk is not standardized variable? This is not correct, okay? How much milk is actually the dependent variable? That's what you're trying to measure. Okay, so that's not right. Why are we talking about plants, guys? We're talking about cows. Protein type, yeah. So you want to make sure that they are both receiving the same kind of protein, just that one is more than the other. Okay. No access to other food. Okay. Give meal at the same time, that's a good one. Yeah. Health of the cows. Good. I'm glad nobody put gender. Because sometimes they do that, people do that in the test and then they forget, oh, only female cows can make milk. So I would have to make that wrong. But yeah, most of these are good answers. Any questions? All right, let's keep going with the PowerPoints. Here is another concept track question. On Stewart's experiment, what is the independent variable? Show me your answer. Good. 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 Yes. Yeah. Anyone else? Good try. Try again, please. Try again. Try again. Good. Remember, this is independent variable. It's something that he could control, right? That's good. Is that an answer? Yeah, good, good, good. Type of flask used, right? Okay. Is it the open flask or is it the swan neck flask? And that's the only thing you change, right? It's not the type of broth because it's the same broth, right? For both of the groups. There are a lot of random stuff on the internet that are not true. And this is one of my favorite ones that I picked up, right? I don't know if you've seen this before, right? But the claim goes like this. If you water your plants with microwave water in as little as 9 days, your plant is going to die. And the person is trying to tell people, see, microwaves are dangerous, don't use them. If you kill the plant, then it's definitely going to be harmful to you. Okay? I did a poll yesterday. Half of my class think this is true. Half of them think this is not true. What do you guys think? It's like a subtle thumbs up or thumbs down. Do you think this is true or this is not true? And by the way, it's not like you microwave it and you pour it into the plant like boiling hot, right? That's definitely gonna kill your plant. It's like microwave it, cool it down, and then water your plants with it. Do you think it's gonna kill your plant?
No.
Thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you think?
No.
No. Interesting. Don't be afraid to tell me what you think. No judgment. Well, this is something that you can actually try out at home. Okay, you can set up 2 experimental group and then you can run an experiment to see whether it's true or not. But I know you guys are not gonna do it, so just read the result. Okay, this is not true. This is absolutely not true. You can microwave water. You're not gonna make the water toxic or anything. It's safe for consumption and it's definitely safe to water your plants with it. Okay, everything we talked about so far has been pretty straightforward, I hope, and it's mostly dealing with animals or dealing with plants, and it's much easier when you deal with animals and plants compared to dealing with humans. lots of experiments do involve testing on humans, like new medications, for example. And when we test humans, we have to follow certain ethical guidelines. For example, you have to have their consent, right? Not just initial consent, you need to have their ongoing consent. If the person say, I don't want to participate anymore halfway, you need to let them go. Okay, you can't like keep them. Has to be voluntary. You cannot force them into doing the experiment. You cannot coerce them into doing it. Although you can offer some incentive, right? Usually money to encourage people to participate, but it has to be voluntary ultimately. And there has to be protection against physical and mental harm, right? For the people who are participating. These are just some of the basic things to consider when we are doing experiments that involves humans, right? And generally speaking, there is going to be a whole ethic board that would review your experiment and make sure that it adheres to all the guidelines that are there. Now, humans are complicated, and when you do testing on humans, you want to minimize bias. You want to minimize psychological effects. And that's why we have to include a placebo in these experiments. Okay? A placebo is a sham treatment. It's a fake treatment. It's not the real thing. Right? We don't tell the people they're receiving a placebo, that would defeat the purpose. Right? You would tell them they're receiving the treatment, and they would think they're getting the real thing. They wouldn't know whether it's the actual thing or the placebo, and that helps minimize the bias and the psychological effects of the experiment, and that tends to make the results a little bit more reliable. Okay, I'll give you an example. My younger daughter, when she was 4 or 5, she's very dramatic. Okay, like if she falls down at the park, and it's not even bleeding, and then it would be the end of the world. She'd be crying a lot, right? And then I would go over and I would take out a piece of Band-Aid, okay, and then I just put it on the non-existent wound, and almost right away she would be better. Like, okay, I'm better now, and then she would go back. Did the Band-Aid do anything for her physically? Absolutely not, right? Okay, like it just makes her feel better because she believes it's gonna make her feel better, right? It's like kissing the wound better, right? Okay, this is like that kind of psychological effect. We don't want those things when we're doing an experiment. We want to know if the drug is actually working. Now, don't get me wrong. Like some drugs, like there are some situations where you cannot will yourself into getting better. Okay, like if a person has like cancer or something, you cannot just believe the drug is working and then you're gonna get better, right? So for those situations, the placebo is not so much for that. But if I give you a pill for like sleeping better, right? Like the melatonin situation, I want to find out if the melatonin is actually working or if it's just psychological effects, then I need to have a placebo, right? Because people sometimes if they take something and they believe it's gonna make them sleep better, then they end up sleeping better, right? Okay. So there are some situations where the placebo is absolutely needed for monitoring and minimizing psychological effects, others not so much.
I feel like though, like I know that placebo is like fake, I guess you can say.
Yeah, it is fake, yeah.
It is fake,
Yeah.
but I feel like, okay, let's say I'm feeling sick.
Uh-huh.
If I tell myself like I'm not sick, like I'm fine, like I'm not sick.
And that's totally fine, right? But however, when pharmaceutical company are doing experiments on like an actual drug, that's the exact kind of results they want to minimize, right?
Oh,
Want to
okay,
make
okay.
sure it's not because they are willing it into,
Oh.
yeah. So that's why they have to include a placebo. Are we together? Yeah. Okay. For the cow experiment that we just did with the milk yield, should we include a placebo just to make it more reliable, the results? Placebo, yes, placebo, no placebo. What do you think? For the cow experiment, should we include, why not?
Cows can't have bias.
That's right. The cows don't know you're doing experiment on them, right? They're not gonna be like, you know what, let's hold out on the milk, okay? I don't wanna, give them good results. It's not necessary, right? So only when we're dealing with humans do we need to include placebo. Got it? All right, I'm gonna tell you a story It's not related to experiments. Do not tell me this story on the test. It's just something else that's related to placebo, and I want to share it with you, okay? This is, oh, never mind that, don't worry about it. Okay, so this is the story. There is a birth control pill, okay, contraception called Freya 28, okay, Freya 28. You might have heard of this before, you might not have, doesn't matter. It's a birth control pill that's taken by the female, and when you buy it, it comes in a pack that looks like this. There's going to be 3 weeks of contraceptive, which prevents the pregnancy, and then there's going to be a 1 week of green pills, and these are the placebos. They do absolutely nothing, okay? Just a week of green pills with no medication in it. Why are we getting 1 week of nothing? Yeah.
They kind of like keep it on track, really.
Yeah, exactly right. This is for timekeeping, right? So after taking the contraceptive for 3 weeks, the person can get off the pill, and then the period would happen. But during that period, you want to be able to keep track of time, right? So just making a habit of taking the pills. And when you run out of the green pills, you're like, okay, this is the end of the cycle. I'm going to start my next pack of contraceptive, right? And it's not that you need to have it. It's just convenience to help you keep track of time, right? Because sometimes you might forget, right? Do I get on the pill again like tomorrow, or was it like 2 more days, right? You're with me? Okay. So this is the story. The company that makes this drug, they messed up, right? There was a batch of the pills where they swapped the placebo with the actual pills, okay? So now the white ones don't have medication, but the green ones do, right? The people are taking the contraceptive thinking it's going to give them protection, right? Okay, but it doesn't, right? And then they send out an emergency recall and say people who are taking it needs to take back up contraception. So that's a lot of trouble for the company, okay?
Wait,
So-
so why would we do that?
It's a mistake, right? It's not like, oh, you know what, let's mess with these people. Oh, no, this is not on purpose. This is, someone's gonna lose the job, okay, for that mistake, all right? So this is, where a placebo is useful in other settings, right? Okay? It's not just something that we use in doing an experiment, okay? If I ask you about placebo, don't talk about it, right? This is not related to the questions I'm asking you. All right, let's go back to here. Now, when we do the experiments with people, we try to minimize bias using the placebo, but we also want to minimize bias in the people who are assessing the results. Okay? Let's think about this. If it's a pharmaceutical company researching a drug to see if it's effective or not, then they have a financial incentive to want it to work, right? So we don't want them to be biased when they're interpreting the results, right? So that's why there are different kinds of experiments to minimize that. Number one, it can be a blind experiment. In a blind experiment, the person who's receiving the shots, okay, the subject, they are blind. They don't know what they're receiving. They don't know if it's the placebo that they're getting or if it's the real thing. Right? So that minimizes the bias in the recipient, right? Okay? But the researcher knows. However, that's not the gold standard, right? Because like I said, what if the researcher has an invested interest in making things work? Okay, there's a lot of money, right, when it comes to new drugs and things like that. So the gold standard would be double-blind experiment. Okay? So the person receiving it does not know what they're receiving. The person who's giving them also has no idea what they're giving. Okay? I'm giving you something, I have no idea whether it's placebo or not. Okay? So who knows? It's going to be some third party that has no invested interest in the project. They will oversee the experiment, they will have the data, and they will interpret it without bias. Okay? Do we understand the difference between blind and double blind? Okay, we're almost there. Interpreting results. Let's take a look at this. Let's say I have a new drug. Okay, I just made this name up. And this is supposed to help reduce the symptoms of jet lag. And jet lag is when you go to a different time zone and you can't sleep and then you feel headache and tired and it's all messed up. That's jet lag. So supposedly we have a drug and we want to see if it's effective in reducing the symptoms of jet lag. So we do an experiment. We have two groups of people. The control group is going to receive the placebo, and then we're going to have a treatment group that's receiving the actual drug. We're not going to tell them what they're receiving, right? We just give it to them, and then we look at whether or not they have jet lag symptoms. So the control group, there are almost 80% of the people in the control group has jet lag. And then here with the drug, about 30% of them has jet lag. So let's take a look at this and think about it for a moment. Again, thumbs up or thumbs down. If you think based on this result, the new drug is effective, in other words, it works, thumbs up. If you think the result indicates that the drug does not work, thumbs down. I want to see what you think. All right, all right.
So what's gonna happen if, wait, so what is the point of the drug? Like you're
The
saying.
drug is to reduce the symptoms of jet lag.
Reduce the symptoms,
Yeah.
okay.
So does it work or not work based on result? Let me see. Okay. All right. Okay. Anyone else? What are you guys saying? Does it work? Does it not work? The drug? Okay, so almost everybody said it works, and that's correct. Okay, because when you give people placebo, is it supposed to help them with anything?
No.
No, and that's what we see, right? 80% of the group reported jet lag, and the 20%, some people just don't get bothered by jet lag, right? Okay, so maybe that's just a small percent individual. But with the drug, a lot less people are having symptoms of jet lag, so it must be helping. Okay. Let's take a look at the next one. How about now? Do you think the drug is effective or ineffective? Or maybe it's hard to tell now. What do you think? You think ineffective? This is ineffective, that's right. Look, if you give them sugar pill, right, you see reduction in jet lag. And if you give them the actual pill, you also see reduction in jet lag. If the result is this, it suggests to you what's helping them feel better is not the medication. It's just the fact that they're taking something. You give them a candy and you don't tell them it's candy, it's drug, it's gonna reduce your jet lag symptom, and they take it, and psychologically they feel better, and therefore you see a reduction. Is that okay? All right, we are almost there. Long question. What do you think? Last call. What's that? Good try. Good. All right, let's pick it up. So we have the drug. We're testing it on pregnant mice. So anything that's male would automatically be wrong, right? And if you're testing it on pregnant mice, then anything that's non-pregnant would also be wrong. So for the control is the reference. Control is no manipulation. So do we give them more drugs or do we give them no drugs? More drugs or no drugs? No drugs. That's the answer. All right. Hey, a couple more slides. When we do the experiment and we find out there's some relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable, it's important to remember sometimes just because two things are correlated, just because there's a relationship between two things, does not automatically imply cause and effect. Right? For example, in this graph, you can see people who are more stressed out are more likely to catch a cold. But does that mean the stress is causing the cold? Well, not necessarily. There could be other underlying factors that could contribute to both of these things. Maybe it's poor diet, maybe it's little exercise. Right? So we cannot directly say A causes B just because there's a relation. Right? We have to examine things that are behind these things to have a better understanding of what the actual relationship means. There's a website you can look at later if you want. It's called Spurious Correlations. It shows you random things that have nothing to do with each other, but they have very close correlation. The red line shows the amount of cheese people consume per capita, and then the black line shows the number of people who died by being tangled in their bed sheets. Apparently that does happen. They are very closely related. But does that mean eating more cheese will cause you to be more likely to die in your bed sheet? Right? Well, we hope not, okay, but I'm pretty sure it's not, right? Yeah, no, this is real, yeah.
Tangled in their bed sheets?
Unfortunately, it's a thing, yeah. I mean, so yeah, you can go onto the website and you can see other trends that are closely related, but they seemingly have no cause and effect relationship, right? And that's the point I'm trying to highlight here, right? Who drinks coffee? Excellent. Okay, the rest I assume you don't. So, drinking coffee has always been a thing whether people debate about whether it's like healthy or not, right? So I just randomly do a search between. I haven't updated this slide since 2016, but I'm sure the results will be similar if you do it today. Okay. So here it says drinking more coffee might reverse liver damage from booze, right? So people who drink coffee and they see that on their news feed, they're like, "Ha! I knew drinking coffee is good for me." Okay, right? And then here it says coffee consumption in either parent may risk miscarriage risk, right? And people who don't drink coffee look at them. It's like, see, I gotta tell my friend to stop, right? They're trying to have a baby. This is bad for them, right? Okay, so this is called confirmational bias, right? When you read things online that aligns with your own belief system, you tend to be more receptive to them. And you tend to share those things, okay? And then it just kind of, loop backs on itself and reinforces your idea, right? And so, what I'm trying to tell you is that when we look at these headlines, sure, they are catchy and interesting, but a lot of them are just clickbaits, right? If you look at the studies that they are quoting from, a lot of times the studies are done either in very small groups with few people in the sample, or they might not be following the kind of scientific methods that we learned about today. Right? So by examining some of these articles that are online, it will give you more tools to evaluate the validity of whatever it is that you're reading about. So how do you know if something is trustworthy or not? Well, it's not always straightforward, right? Especially, with AI and stuff like that nowadays, it's really hard to tell whether a source is trustworthy or not. Generally speaking, if it's a primary source, they tend to be more accurate, right, compared to other sources. So primary sources are sources that are created by the person who actually did the experiment. Usually they would publish the results in academic research journals, and before they can publish their work, other experts in the field is going to scrutinize their work and make sure that they are done properly. So they tend to be more trustworthy. Right? Not always. There has been instances where people fake their data and it caused quite a bit of damage. Interviews, right? Reporting at live scenes, all these things are primary sources. Secondary sources include encyclopedia, textbooks, magazine articles. These are fine sometimes, or if you read a biology textbook, I think you can have reasonable confidence that the stuff you're reading are okay. But if we are reading things from a magazine, even from newspapers, right, they are not without bias. Newspaper outlets often have, leaning right or leaning left political views, and the kind of stuff that they report is sometimes biased. So, I guess my point is, using the stuff that you've learned in this lecture, hopefully you're able to be better equipped at discerning whether a source is good or not. And if you're doing research papers for your other courses, like your general education courses, right, you will be asked to evaluate the sources and make sure that you have good ones for your paper. And that is all for lecture 1. Thank you. We're gonna come back for more on Wednesday. Please print your own notes, okay? We need to print lecture 2 PowerPoint notes as well as the study guides. Okay? Thank you guys. See you all.